Good evening and welcome to After Hours. Joining us this evening is Jamie Shaw, and she is the spokesperson for the BC Compassion Club Society and also president of the Canadian Association of Medical Cannabis Dispensaries.
They're both mouthfuls.
Yes.
A little bit.
Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so when I'm just going to call it the Compassion Club. That's how I sort of knew it. When the Compassion Club started, what was the idea? How did it start?
Well, it was very similar to the way that it started in the Bay Area around San Francisco and Oakland, also in Victoria. There was a lot of cannabis around, left over from the 60s, and people were starting to have some pretty serious conditions at the time. HIV was a full-blown crisis. Cancer medications weren't really working at a very effective rate. And so there was a real need for medical cannabis, and that really is what started it. It was not about ending prohibition, countrywide. It was about making sure that the people that were suffering the most under it actually were able to get some sort of relief.
Yeah, because I think we have this picture, the public in general, that, a bunch of people who just want to smoke dope, and this is their way of getting that going.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of stigma, right? There's a lot of stigma around it still. It will take time. We're seeing it crumble in states like Colorado pretty quickly, California as well, but it's going to take some time before that happens.
So how did it get started? Was it a group of people? Talk a bit about the history.
Yeah, it was a few people. I wasn't really involved with the founding of it. I became a member in 2002, and it was founded in '97. And so, yeah, it was a bunch of people just kind of got together, and Hillary Black was heavily involved with that. And
who is Hillary Black?
Hillary Black was one of the founders of the BC Compassion Club Society. She was right there from the beginning. So, yeah, and it runs since about 2003. It's run as a collective model. So it runs through consensus. There's no hierarchy. It's a pretty unique little place.
So what was the process? Like legally, where are you at now? Like, do you have to talk a bit about the structure of it?
Okay, well...
Like, I'm sure it's changed and...
Yeah, well, I mean, since '97, we've been a registered nonprofit society. That is usually why the Compassion Club says they're the first. There were other places that were selling cannabis and medical cannabis, but in terms of legally recognized in some form as a business that was selling cannabis, that was the first. And so that was kind of a big deal, and it got a lot of attention at the time.
Yeah.
And then people realized it wasn't that big a deal, and so we became part of the fabric of the city.
What kind of loopholes did you have to go through? Like, you've been around, for about 19 years. Obviously, you're taken seriously. The group is taken seriously. Medical cannabis is taken more seriously. Like, what loopholes or things, sort of processes did you have to go through?
It's not so much loopholes. I think we just kind of said, look, this needs to be done. We're going to do it. At the same time, it was part of our mission to get the government to recognize that they should really be the ones doing this in terms of the regulations. So that's really what it's been about for us. It's been a fight for 20 years, and we're still not quite there yet. We do have a medical system. We've had that since 2001, but it keeps getting changed and quite drastically changed, and none of them have really been super effective. So it's just been a giant gray area. So it's not so much loopholes, it's just we're illegal, we know it's illegal, but we're doing it because it's right.
And so what kind of supporters do you have? Like, do you have the medical community?
Some, yeah.
Okay.
Again, stigma is a wide-ranging thing, so a lot of doctors don't really know very much about it. We've known about the endocannabinoid system since the 70s. It's still not taught in medical schools, and it's a pretty major system in our body. So,
Would you talk a bit about that? Because I don't know what that means.
The endocannabinoid system is basically, it's similar to like a nervous system where it's receptors that respond to things, only in this case it's cannabinoids. It also produces cannabinoids. So breast milk has cannabinoids in it. Your body produces its own cannabinoids. Those are called endocannabinoids. And then there's also phytocannabinoids, which would be from plants. And cannabis isn't the only plant that has cannabinoids. Echinacea has cannabinoids as well.
I take echinacea when I'm starting to get sick.
Well, I mean, we're really interested in the science around all of the other cannabinoids. THC and CBD get a lot of press. Sometimes people talk about CBN, CBG now a little bit, but there's almost 80 cannabinoids. So we know that there's got to be some health effects from other ones as well. Interesting.
So what kind of ailments does this help? Like, talk about your clients, I guess.
Yeah, well, this is...
how it's, we were saying HIV, has that changed? Is it more expansive?
Yes, it's definitely more expansive. I mean, I think, again, at the time that it was founded, that was a very clear population that was in desperate straits. And so that provided the motivation to break the law on their behalf. And then ever since then, it's been people seeing the benefits, people seeing their loved ones actually have functional lives again, seeing things sometimes go into remission, being able to drop prescription pills that are coming with a whole host of side effects that aren't helpful. So that's really what's spurred it on. And in terms of the condition, it helps. It almost is everything under the sun. This is one of the reasons why we do need to understand more about the cannabinoids, because there are different strains that have different genetics that are going to have different effects. So one strain might be really good for depression, another strain might be really bad for depression. And so it gets a little difficult to talk about as just one substance on its own. But different strains of cannabis can be good for, they can have antihistamine properties, they can be anti-nausea is a big thing that it's used for. It's being used as an alcohol replacement in Denmark, it's an opiate replacement in a lot of places. And then, of course, it also has a whole host of effect on specific conditions as well.
So you have your own list of different types, and I guess there's different ways of taking it, like you can smoke it, or you can you talk a bit about that and how people figured out which type would be best for which ailment?
Well, you've got to experiment. That's really the thing about it. At the Compassion Club, when you become a member, you get a tracking sheet where you get to track the effects of what different strains have done to you, what different products, what effects they've had. Because we're all different, and we like to think that things that come in a bottle, like a pill bottle, are going to be the same right across the board, and they're not. We know they're not. Even very simple things like peanuts can kill some people. So cannabis is no different. Some people are not going to like it. You know, we've never heard of a death related to cannabis, but certainly people getting effects that they don't like or that they're not comfortable with. And then, of course, when you're talking about mental illness, if you're getting the wrong strain, it can actually it can be very detrimental, absolutely. So, I mean, it's been, you know, it's knowledge that's been gained from working with patients and listening to what they've been telling us.
And so have you kept track of this? Like, do you have a, what's the word I'm looking for, like a book of information that you've kept?
We used to. Yeah, we used to do, we used to let our members track the strains. So we had a feedback book that actually contained a lot of that information. But what we've found is we've just been able to retain it and pass it on through training, through the most part. Because again, it is different for everybody. They're generalizations. Sativas generally are going to be a little more uplifting. Generally, they're the ones that you're going to want to stay away from if you're worried that there's a history of psychosis in your family or something like that. Whereas usually most indica strains will be more calming or more sedative or sleepy.
So is anybody doing that kind of research? Is there anybody doing that kind of keeping tabs, you know, in a scientific way?
There are. It's just you're talking about a really complex plant, and so it's, you know, it's the most studied plant on the planet right now, or was a year ago, and trying to figure it out is literally as complicated as trying to figure us out. We're not all the same. We're not a simple little process. We were talking about the 80 different cannabinoids. It may not even be the cannabinoids that are most responsible for the effect. There's also terpenes in cannabis, which are known to have beneficial effects in other plants. Things like limonene, which can be found in citrus fruits, and caryophyllene, which can be found in like pepper and clove, and things like that how they all play together with the combination of 80-some cannabinoids, and maybe it's the flavonoids, and maybe it's something else in there we haven't found yet either. There's a really complex interplay between them. So it's been very difficult. A lot of the studies have said, oh, cannabis is not good for this, but they don't really tell you what strain it was, what the genetic line was, which is why you see a study one day that says, oh, it's really bad for depression, and then a study another day saying, well, actually, it's kind of good for depression. They're doing different strains, so they're different substances completely.
So how does the Compassion Club work? Is it like a medical center? Is it people like talk about that? And I guess when I think about it, I'm thinking about like how does it differ than a place like Insight, for example?
Well, quite different. You know, Insight is a place where people can go and ingest, and while we did have a safe inhalation space at one point, that we stopped that quite a long time ago. But basically, the Compassion Club is a member-run nonprofit. It's run for members, by members. They elect a board of directors every year, and the staff operate the club for the board of directors and for the members. The staff operates in a non-hierarchical model, so it's consensus-based. It can sometimes take a little while to come to some decisions, but we're all a lot more comfortable with them usually when we get there, so that's an important piece of it. In terms of if you wanted to become a member, you have to get your paperwork faxed to us from a doctor's office. You can't just show up with it. And then once we get that fax, we call back and confirm with the doctor, because it's important to us that they know if you're going to start taking cannabis, at the very least, if they're not going to recommend it. We want them to know that you're taking cannabis for whatever condition it is that they've diagnosed you with. And then we do an orientation where we talk about some of this stuff. It's usually about an hour long. You learn a little bit about the endocannabinoid system, a little bit about different strains, and then the person will usually also give you some information specific to your condition. But always with the caveat that, you know, we're not doctors, and it doesn't do the same thing to everybody. So, you know, start slow, go slow, figure it out, try little different things before you just jump right in and try and hit high doses,
And
for
so
example.
you must guide people a fair bit.
Absolutely, yeah. And that's one of the really important things about the face-to-face distribution. We're kind of a combination of health office, psychiatrist, and bartender. People want to talk to us about their problems, and sometimes it's not their cannabis-related problems, and sometimes they don't have anyone else to do that with. And so we're also very much like a frontline service. We will refer people to other social services in the city that may help them out and things like that.
Okay, so and is there an age, would you say there's an average age, an average type of person, or have you been surprised by some of the people who have come?
Always. Some of the conditions and things that people are having to deal with are shocking sometimes. You don't realize people are dealing with things like that. So yeah, that can be, but for the most part, our demographic is much older, and usually pretty serious chronic conditions.
Okay, so how did you get started? What was your interest in this?
Well, I became a member of the club. My doctor actually referred me to the club in 2002. He had diagnosed me with high anxiety, which I thought was hilarious because I was here in Vancouver, and I just figured, I was from New York. I'd been living in New York for a long time and East Coast cities, so I just figured,
you thought you'd calm down.
Yeah, what are you talking about? It's like anxiety. And he had tried me on some different medications, and either it didn't do anything or it just sapped my motivation. And I would be sitting on the couch, calm, doing nothing, and with no drive to do anything. And so those things were not helpful for me at all. So pretty much everything that he gave me, within a week or two, we had to stop doing and find something else. And so he had recommended I go to the club, which I actually thought was kind of funny at the time because I had smoked recreationally before, and sometimes it seemed to help, sometimes it didn't, and I was like, okay, I'm not going to say no. And when I went into the club, they gave me that tracking sheet, and I started tracking things, and I started learning about the genetics. I knew a little bit about the main distinction between indicas and sativas, but really learning about the different genetic lines enabled me to find out exactly what strains would work for me, and they've controlled my anxiety ever since. So.
Interesting.
Yeah, so a few years later, I ran for the board, and I served on the board for a couple of years, and just kind of kept around on the periphery for a while. And with the MMPR coming in and people were really ready
What's
to
the
abandon. Oh, that was the last Health Canada adjustment to the cannabis program.
Okay.
And there were issues. When we looked at it, most of the people that we serve at the club were not going to be served very well by ordering through the mail, by ordering large amounts, by having a secure place where they can store their medicine for a month. Those were all some of the issues that led us to say that we're going to have to stay open. At that time, a lot of dispensaries in the country started closing. A lot of people started switching to the other system, trying to go through the Health Canada system. Okay. And it seemed like a desperate time for dispensaries. And so I threw my hat in the ring.
So you mentioned earlier you're a nonprofit, so it isn't run like a business. Like, is there profit?
It is, but
okay.
no. So what the Compassion Club does is, there's so many little moving pieces into what we do. Particularly when we first started, it was important for us to, as much as we wanted to provide low-cost medicine to patients and donations, and when people needed it, we do give a half gram every month to members and gifts throughout the year and things like that. We didn't want it to be so low that they were going to be encouraged to resell it, because that was a big concern for us. We had a closed loop system with our contractors, and we wanted, we really enforced our members not reselling medicine. And so we had to keep the prices a little bit higher than maybe they needed to be at the time. So what we did was we started the Wellness Center. And the Wellness Center is, we run between 10 and 12 different modalities of healing. It's entirely funded through the cannabis sales on the other side. We have an apothecary. I believe it's the largest member use apothecary in Western Canada. We have herbalists there, nutritionalists, a doctor of Chinese medicine that does acupuncture, massage, and patients can generally access these for an average of about $1 to $2 a session. So we found that really also helps increase their healing speeds.
Well, the overall health, it looks like you're looking at overall health.
Well, cannabis used to be the plant that was in the apothecary with all the others, and now we've got it over on its own room. Hopefully, maybe we can get it back in there one day.
And where do you fit into this legal debate? I guess still it is. And do you see decriminalization coming? And anyways, that's a big thing to try and answer.
I think politically it's very difficult for decriminalization to come right now. That was the NDP's platform, not the Liberals' platform. So I feel like, on a political level, they may be just sort of stuck trying to wait to get to legalization. But we don't know what that's going to look like. We've got a lot of public opinion and a lot of professional opinion that are pointing in all different directions. Okay. For example, we've been illegal the whole time that we've been around, yet we received a commendation from Parliament on our 10-year anniversary. Wow. 2 of the early employees at the club and 1 on the island received the Queen's Diamond Jubilee Medal for their work in medical cannabis. We've had the Senate recommend us back in 2002, courts in 2001. So even though we're illegal, there are a lot of people within the establishment that see the necessity for it, and hopefully we'll see something similar to Colorado, where that existing market is brought into what legalization looks like.
So staff, how many staff does it take? How does that work?
Between 40 and 50.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and that's that's also because of the Wellness Center side.
Okay, so incorporating all that. You were mentioning the prescription drugs, and I've been noticing on television with horror. You might have a toenail infection and you're given this drug, but you might die of a heart attack, or you might have this thing happen. And it's scary, actually.
It is. And again, this comes down to everybody's different. I mean, they have to put those there because there's a percentage. I don't even know what percentage it is where that requires people to have to put that on their labels, but there are a percentage of people that are going to have different effects to different things. And so that's that is a concern, I think, particularly with pharmaceuticals that you don't necessarily see with whole plant medicines. For example, foxglove tea has been used for people with heart disease and heart conditions for a very long time. When the pharmaceutical industry got around to it, they found digitalis, which has definitely saved some lives. It's also killed some people. So I think we've got this idea that the pill is the first thing to go to, and then when that doesn't work, try everything else. And I think that's actually the opposite. If somebody's got a a history of heart disease, maybe they should be trying foxglove tea before they end up getting put on the digitalis, right? It seems like it's an extra escalation.
And where do the pharmaceuticals fit into cannabis? Do you see them maybe being interested or
absolutely.
making
And they have been. Yeah, they have been for quite a long time. In the 70s was the first one, was Marinol. Now there's some different ones, Sesament and Nabalone and Sativex, that are all doing slightly different things. And it seems to be mixed. Some people seem to get good results from it. Other people find that it's inconsistent, where one time the pill will hit them really hard and the next time it doesn't seem to do anything. I haven't heard of any serious side effects coming from any of those things. It's just generally, it doesn't seem to be working as well for patients.
So with the work that Compassion Club does, this seems like a really silly question, but is part of taking cannabis, do you get high all the time? Like, are you high?
Depends. I think your tolerance does go up. So if you're using edible cannabis for a serious pain condition, for example, you're probably not anywhere near as high as you should be for the amount of stuff that you're eating, because you get used to it, or it's counteracting negative effects that you're having. Right. That also has to do with strain selection and some sort of combinations of what the cannabinoids are as well. CBD has been a big one lately, where people are, they think that it will help them more and not get them high. The thing is, it's not just the CBD and the THC that has these effects. It's different compounds in it. So it might still actually get you high. There's also a question of whether that's uncomfortable for you or not. I think a lot of people may feel something like, if you're taking a painkiller, for example, you may feel like it just kind of gives you an edge or just puts you above something. Above your pain is something that I used to hear my mother-in-law say a lot. So there's a trade-off, right? It's like you might actually need that to get the effects that you need. And it's only a question of whether it's uncomfortable for you or not.
And so where does the cannabis come from?
At the club specifically, they work with contracted growers. So everything is closed loop, as I was mentioning earlier. So we buy everything on their contract, and we get to go and look at their sites if we want. And so we've got a really good relationship with them. They've also been able to take patient feedback and develop strains based on that. So
who are these people, or how are they functioning?
They're just people. They're they're a lot of them have conditions themselves and were growing for a long time beforehand. BC, similar to Northern California, there was a lot of cannabis around way before there were dispensaries, and so some of those are old just school people. Hippies up in the mountains. And, yeah, absolutely.
Now, recently there was a Supreme Court case, I believe, about being able to grow it in your own home. Can you talk about it? It was a federal
court, yes. Okay. Yeah. Some of my testimony was actually entered in there and was mentioned in the ruling about specifically the dispensaries being the heart of access, and showing that patients were preferring that model regardless of the fact that it was illegal. And that starts to get a little tricky, because you do have newer dispensaries that are opening that are very easy to get into, and so you've got government licensed producers that are saying, oh, well, it's an uneven playing field, but CAMCD dispensaries all have to require medical paperwork as well, so they're both illegal and keeping higher standards than other ones, and so that can be a little bit difficult.
And so how did this case come to be, I guess? Who brought this case to the fore?
Well, there were 4 plaintiffs. Neil Allard was one of them. I can't remember the other 3 offhand. I believe Jason Wilcox was one. And John Conroy, who's been an excellent lawyer in this field for a very long time, was one of the lawyer team as well. And so, it was around the switch, that last switch that I was talking about that Health Canada did. Yeah. The government had been really difficult to work with. They had said, okay, you can grow a plant for somebody else if they can't grow for themselves. And it took lots of court cases to say, look, 1 plant is ridiculous. And so they went, okay, you can grow for 2 people. And then they just kept dragging their heels and
not wanting to.
yeah, Kirk Tusaw also, there was a Supreme Court case around edibles where Kirk Tusaw was the lawyer, and that's what he was mentioning was we just keep going around and then they make incremental changes. So that's what had been happening under the designated grower system, and then that just got thrown out completely and replaced with an entirely new system. And so since that point, we've really had like 4 different industries here in Canada. You've got the legal medical cannabis industry, you've got the illegal dispensary medical cannabis industry, you've still got designated growers that are still supplying to patients that were authorized by Health Canada this whole time under injunction, and then you've still got the black market that's still there. So we've actually got like 4 different parallel systems right now.
So what happened in this case, and what does it mean for, like, the people you know, or?
It remains to be seen exactly. They did agree that it was a violation of Section 7 charter rights to ban people from being able to grow their own medicine. But usually what courts do in these situations is they can point the government in the direction, but they're not allowed to actually write the law. So basically they did what they did with dispensaries back in 2001. They said, maybe look at this issue. Only this time there's actually a deadline on it. They've been given 6 months, and if they don't come up with something in 6 months, people are going to be allowed to grow their own. So it'll be interesting to see whether there's any sort of an extension there or what happens. It's hard to say.
And what would that mean for a place like your place, the Compassion Club, and the Wellness Center, I guess?
Well, nothing really. I mean, we support the right for people to grow their own. Some of our members grow their own, and sometimes they want a place where they can come in and talk to other patients or people that are using other strains. Sometimes they want to try other strains. It's a big investment if you're growing your own medicine and it suddenly turns out that wasn't the right strain for you, or there's better strains that you could be growing. And so they're really complementary systems. They're not really adversarial in that way.
So what do you see happening in the future for the Compassion Club? It's been around for a long time.
Everything is up in the air right now. We have to go to the Board of Variance with the city to see that if we can get a license. They created a whole class of license just for the Compassion Club, basically, but we're still too close to a school, so we may not get that license. So that's, a lot of our focus is there right now, but also on the provincial and federal levels as well. There's a lot of work going on.
So, and do you welcome help? Like, could people contact you?
Absolutely. Yeah,
and help in whatever various ways? And
Yeah.
how would they do that?
Probably at info@thecompassionclub.org. Would be the best place for the Compassion Club.
And I'm thinking, there's got to be elder people out there who probably could use different kinds of medication, but might be shy about. Is there any outreach, like feel uncomfortable about it even though they'd like to try something different?
Yeah, we haven't really done a lot of outreach that way, but we haven't really had to. Frankly, the word gets around. I mean, like I said, when you see a loved one benefit from cannabis, you tell everyone you know. When your child needs it and it helps them, you tell everyone you know, and you fight. You do whatever you can for your child, right? So, that's what we're seeing is on both spectrums. We see very young children with very serious conditions, usually types of epilepsy, trying oils and benefiting from oils. And then we also see much more elderly people. By far, that's the larger demographic. And yeah, a lot of them come in saying, I haven't smoked since I was in high school. I don't really want to smoke. And usually we'll point them to tinctures or things like that, or help them learn how to smoke if that's what they end up needing to do. But edibles or tinctures can usually work very well as well.
Thank you so much for doing this, Jamie.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
And thanks for joining us.